Claire's newfound passion for cycling seemed to come out of nowhere. At first, Ethan admired her dedication. She was up before dawn, lacing up her cycling shoes, adjusting her sleek, expensive helmet, and setting off into the crisp morning air. She'd return hours later, flushed and breathless, talking excitedly about elevation gains and endurance training. He listened, nodding along, impressed by how committed she was to this supposed charity ride. But then, little things started to bother him. Claire had never been particularly interested in fitness before. Sure, she'd gone through short-lived gym phases, yoga one month, spin classes the next, but this was different. She was obsessed. Every conversation revolved around gear, training techniques, and the importance of finding the perfect cadence. She was meticulous about tracking routes, spending hours on the computer mapping out long rides, marking scenic overlooks and rest stops with a level of detail that seemed unnecessary. Ethan tried to be supportive. If she was passionate about cycling, he wanted to encourage her. He even offered to join her on one of her weekend training rides, thinking it would be a great way to spend time together. But Claire had been oddly evasive. "Oh, babe, you wouldn't enjoy it," she had said, waving him off with a laugh. "I have a really intense schedule, and I don't want to slow down for you." He had chuckled at the time, pretending not to notice the casual insult buried in her words. Still, the more she trained, the less they connected. She spent evenings tinkering with her bike, adjusting gears and lubricating chains. She bought an expensive new cycling kit that fits her body like a second skin, something sleek and professional, something designed to impress. Ethan had always found her beautiful, but there was something about the way she stared at herself in the mirror before heading out that made him uneasy. Then came the moment that changed everything. Ethan had been scrolling through social media late one night, idly reading posts, when curiosity got the better of him. He searched for the charity ride Claire was supposedly training for. It wasn't hard to find. The event had a flashy website filled with participant lists, fundraising goals, and team rosters. He skimmed through the names, expecting to find Claire's, but she wasn't there. He checked again, searching by last name, then first. Nothing. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe she hadn't officially registered yet, but why would she train this hard without signing up? It didn't add up. The next morning, as she kissed him goodbye and wheeled her bike out the door, Ethan made a decision. He wasn't going to sit at home wondering anymore. He was going to follow her, and what he discovered would change everything. Ethan never thought he'd be the kind of man to follow his wife. The idea felt desperate, like something out of a bad detective novel. But as Claire rode off that morning, her back straight, her movements fluid and confident, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The lie about the charity ride was a crack in the foundation of her story, and Ethan had spent the night wondering just how deep that crack ran. So he got in his car and followed her. He kept a safe distance, careful not to let her see him. He wasn't sure what he was expecting. Maybe that she'd actually be riding hard, pushing herself up grueling hills, proving him wrong. But something inside him whispered that wasn't going to happen. Claire's route took her out of town, past suburban neighborhoods and onto winding country roads. Ethan stayed back, using the curves and hills to keep himself hidden, while still maintaining sight of her neon green jersey in the distance. She rode with an ease that made it clear this wasn't about endurance training. There was no urgency in her pedaling, no exhaustion weighing down her movements. She wasn't pushing herself. She was simply going somewhere. The air was thick with late summer humidity, the morning sun casting a golden glow over the hills. It was the kind of day that would have been perfect for a long, scenic ride, the kind of day that might have convinced him that Claire was telling the truth. But as she neared a bend in the road, she suddenly veered off the main route, taking a small gravel path that led into the woods. Ethan's pulse quickened. He slowed his car and pulled off onto the shoulder, waiting a moment before following on foot. The path wasn't meant for cars, and if he got any closer, she'd hear the engine. He had to be careful. He walked briskly, his shoes crunching against the gravel as he moved through the trees, his heart pounding harder with every step. And then he saw them. At the end of the path was a small, scenic overlook, a place meant for rest, for catching one's breath while taking in the view of the rolling hills below. A wooden bench sat at the edge of the clearing, and leaning against it, side by side, were two sleek road bikes. One of them was Claire's, the other belonged to someone else, and then he saw her. Claire stood by the railing, her helmet now hanging from her handlebars, her golden brown hair falling loose around her shoulders. She was laughing, her body relaxed, her posture open in a way Ethan hadn't seen in months. Sitting beside her, leaning just a little too close, was Jake. Ethan knew Jake in passing, a fellow cyclist from Claire's riding group. He was fit, rugged, and always had that easy, confident smirk. Ethan had met him at a few social events, had even shaken his hand once. But now, standing in the shadows, watching his wife tilt her head toward him with an intimacy that made Ethan's stomach turn, he saw Jake in an entirely different light. They weren't just riding partners. Ethan felt something inside him snap into place, a grim realization settling over him like a thick fog. Claire wasn't training for charity. She wasn't mapping routes for endurance. She was mapping routes to him. For a moment, Ethan did nothing. He just stood there watching. He wanted to be wrong. He wanted to believe this was all a misunderstanding. Maybe they were just friends. Maybe this was innocent. But then Jake reached out, brushing a strand of hair from Claire's face. She didn't pull away. She didn't stiffen in surprise or look around in guilt. She just smiled, letting the moment linger, letting the touch settle between them like a secret. Ethan's fingers curled into fists. His mind raced through the past few weeks, replaying every excuse, every dismissive answer Claire had given him. The nights she had come home late, claiming exhaustion. The way she had showered the moment she walked through the door, avoiding his touch as if she had something to wash away. The sudden shift in their conversations. The way she had slowly, almost imperceptibly, started pulling away. This was why, this was the reason for everything. Ethan took a slow, steadying breath. He wasn't going to storm in like some jealous fool. He needed proof. He reached for his phone, his hand surprisingly steady as he opened the camera. He snapped a few photos, making sure to capture every damning detail. Their bodies too close, their laughter, the way Jake's hand rested on Claire's knee. Claire had thought she was ahead of suspicion. She had thought she was in control, that her story was airtight. But now her cover was falling behind, and Ethan was right behind her. Ethan's hands were steady, his breath controlled, but inside his mind was a storm. The images on his phone screen confirmed what he had already known deep down, but had refused to accept. His wife wasn't here to train. She wasn't here to push herself for a good cause. She was here with Jake, basking in the quiet intimacy of a hidden world they had built together, one where Ethan didn't exist. For a moment he considered walking away. He could turn, head back to his car, process this later when his emotions weren't boiling beneath the surface. Maybe he could be the bigger person, gather his evidence and quietly dismantle his marriage with dignity. But then he saw Claire reach out and rest her hand on Jake's chest, fingers curling slightly against his cycling jersey. That casual touch, so effortless, so familiar, was his breaking point. Ethan stepped forward. The gravel crunched beneath his feet as he approached, the sounds sudden and sharp in the still morning air. Claire's laughter died mid-breath, her head snapping toward the noise. The look on her face was instant, undeniable. Shock, then fear, a fleeting second of guilt, then, just as quickly, an attempt to mask it all, to compose herself. But it was too late. Jake straightened as well, his easy confidence faltering as he took in Ethan's stiff posture, the set of his jaw, the cold determination in his eyes. He had the nerve to look surprised, like he hadn't just been caught red-handed. "Ethan," Claire's voice was tight, controlled. She glanced quickly at Jake, as if mentally scrambling for a way to explain this. "What are you doing here?" Ethan let the question hang in the air for a moment, savoring the way her carefully crafted lies were crumbling. He pulled his phone from his pocket and turned the screen toward her, letting her see exactly what he had captured. "I should be asking you that," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "I thought you were training for your big charity ride, the one you're not actually registered for." Claire's face paled. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, grasping for words, for an excuse, for anything that would lessen the weight of this moment. But there was nothing to be said that could erase what he had seen. Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Hey, man," he started, lifting his hands in a placating gesture. "This isn't—" Ethan turned on him with such force that Jake actually took a step back. "Don't," he warned, his voice low. "Whatever excuse you're about to make, Don't. Jake exhaled through his nose, jaw tightening, but he said nothing. Claire took a step closer to Ethan, her hands reaching for his as if she could somehow smooth this over. Listen, I can explain. Explain? Ethan let out a short, humorless laugh, taking a step back to avoid her touch. Explain what? That you've been sneaking off to meet him while pretending to do something noble? That you've been lying to me for weeks, hell, maybe months? He shook his head, the betrayal pressing down on his chest like a weight. You really thought I wouldn't notice? Claire's lips parted, her breathing uneven. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Ethan. Ethan cut her off sharply. His voice was louder now, carrying through the open space. He gestured toward the bench, toward their bikes propped together like they belonged to a couple on a romantic getaway. You think I don't see what this is, what this has been? He turned to Jake, his fury barely restrained. Was it fun? The secrecy? The sneaking around? Did it make it more exciting? Jake swallowed but didn't respond. Claire, however, took another desperate step toward Ethan. Ethan, please, let's just talk. Let's go home and talk about this. Ethan let out another sharp laugh, shaking his head. Talk? Like how you've been talking to me for the past few weeks? You mean dodging my questions, lying straight to my face? He gestured to the scenery around them. This isn't just a mistake, Claire. This is a choice. You chose this. Claire's expression crumbled, and for the first time genuine fear flashed in her eyes. Not fear of being caught, fear of what came next. Fear of what she was about to lose. Jake, sensing the shift in energy, cleared his throat and stepped forward. Look, Ethan, I think you should just calm down. Ethan turned on him with a glare that stopped him in his tracks. You think I should calm down? His voice dropped to a deadly quiet. You slept with my wife, and you want me to be calm? Jake shifted uncomfortably. It's not like that. Ethan tilted his head. Then what is it like, Jake? Because from where I'm standing it looks pretty damn clear. Jake looked at Claire, searching for help, but she was too shaken to respond. Ethan exhaled, feeling the last of his patience slip away. He pulled his phone up again and took another picture right in front of them. Claire flinched, but Ethan wasn't done. He opened his messages, selected the cycling group's chat, and began typing. Claire's eyes widened in horror. Ethan, don't. Oh, I'm going to, he said coldly. I think everyone in the group deserves to know what their dedicated teammate has really been up to. Her breath hitched. Please, you should have thought about that before, Ethan snapped. Jake muttered something under his breath and ran a hand over his face, realizing just how deep in trouble they both were. Ethan took one last look at Claire, the woman he had trusted, the woman who had broken that trust so carelessly, and felt the last remnants of love for her dissolve into nothing. Then he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her lies fully exposed. Would you like any refinements before moving on to part 4, the fallout? Ethan walked away, but he could still hear Claire's frantic footsteps behind him, gravel crunching under her cleats as she hurried after him. James, wait, please just talk to me. Her voice, once familiar and warm, now felt foreign, like a melody he no longer recognized. He didn't stop, didn't turn. His blood pounded in his ears, drowning out the excuses he knew she was about to spew. The betrayal sat heavy in his chest, but beneath the heartbreak there was something else, clarity. He wasn't confused anymore. He wasn't second-guessing himself or questioning whether he was overreacting. He had seen it with his own eyes. Claire and Jake laughing together, touching like lovers, hiding away in a place they thought no one would find them. But Ethan had found them, and now the weight of their actions was finally going to crash down on them. Claire's hand brushed his arm, desperate to stop him, but Ethan jerked away, his voice sharp and final. Don't touch me. She flinched, as if he had struck her. Please, she tried again, her tone softer, weaker now. Let's just go home and talk about this. Ethan turned to face her, his expression cold. Home? He echoed. You mean the place where I've been sitting alone while you were out here with him? He gestured back toward Jake, who still stood frozen by the bench, watching the confrontation unfold but making no move to intervene. No, Claire. You gave up home when you started sneaking around. Her mouth opened but no words came out. She knew there was nothing she could say to undo what had already been done. Ethan pulled his phone out again, tapping on the cycling group's chat thread. Claire's eyes went wide. "Either," she said quickly, panic creeping into her voice. "Please don't. You don't have to do this." He let out a humorless laugh. "Oh, I think I do." He typed the message, short and clear, attaching one of the photos he had taken at the Overlook. "Claire's been skipping training rides for a different kind of workout. Figure the group should know." Claire reached for his phone, but he stepped back, pressing send before she could snatch it from his hand. The message was out. The truth was out. She gasped, hands flying to her mouth, as if the weight of what he had just done had finally hit her. "Why would you do that?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "Because you weren't just lying to me, Claire. You lied to everyone. You acted like this big, dedicated athlete, like this whole thing was for a cause, but it was just a cover, just another excuse. And I'm done protecting you." Her breathing was uneven now, chest rising and falling quickly as she processed the consequences. Her phone vibrated, then again, and again. The group chat was exploding. Messages popped up one after another. "Are you serious? What the hell, Claire? Wow, so that's why you were always training alone. Unbelievable." Claire frantically tapped at her screen, probably trying to defend herself, but the damage was already done. Her carefully built facade was shattering in real time, and there was no saving it now. Ethan didn't stay to watch her crumble. He turned and walked back to his car, leaving her in the ruins of her deception. That night, Ethan sat alone in the house they had shared for nearly a decade. It felt different now, colder, quieter. He wasn't sad, not anymore. The sadness had come in waves earlier, after the initial anger had burned out. It had settled in his chest when he pulled into their driveway, staring at the front door, realizing that every memory in that house was tainted now. Every dinner, every morning coffee, every lazy Sunday, they were all shadows of a life that no longer existed. But now, as he scrolled through the group chat, watching the fallout unfold, he felt something else. Something close to closure. Claire had left him multiple messages, text after text, all unread. She had called, too, 12 missed calls. He ignored them all. Instead, he focused on the cycling group's reaction. He hadn't expected so many people to turn on her so quickly, but there was something satisfying about seeing the truth laid bare. Claire had always been the type to present herself as someone reliable, someone who was admired. Now that image was cracking apart. Then another message popped up in the group. "Guess she won't be making the charity ride after all. Not like she ever planned to, huh?" A few people reacted with laughing emojis. Someone else replied, "Jake should go ahead and ride for 2 since he's been putting in all that extra effort." Ethan chuckled darkly. It wasn't exactly justice, but it was something. Then a private message appeared. "Jake, can we talk?" Ethan stared at the message for a long moment before shaking his head and closing the chat. "No, Jake, we can't." Claire came home late, long after Ethan had stopped expecting her. He had been sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television, not really watching, when he heard the door creak open. She stepped inside hesitantly, as if she was afraid he might throw her out the second she crossed the threshold. She probably should have been. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She had been crying. "Good. E?" Her voice was small now, nowhere near the defiant, confident woman who had laughed with Jake that morning. I don't know what to say." He stood up slowly, looking at her like she was a stranger. And maybe she was. "Then don't say anything," he said simply. She swallowed hard. "Are you really going to leave me over this?" Ethan let out a slow breath, nodding. "Yes, I am." Her shoulders trembled, and for a second he thought she might collapse right there in the doorway. But she didn't. She just stood there, defeated, broken, finally realizing that she hadn't just been caught, she had lost. Ethan picked up his car keys and walked past her, not sparing her another glance. Tomorrow, he'd call a lawyer. Tomorrow, he'd start the process of moving forward. But tonight, he was going to drive and let the past fall behind him. The next morning, Ethan woke up to an unfamiliar feeling. Lightness. For weeks, maybe even months, he had been carrying a weight he didn't fully understand. It was the gnawing sense that something was wrong, the quiet suspicion that had settled into his bones but had never quite found a voice. Now, That weight was gone, replaced by clarity, by certainty. Claire had betrayed him, and he had exposed her. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for second chances. By the time he rolled out of bed, the reality of the situation was already sinking in. His marriage was over. There was no coming back from what she had done, and as much as that truth hurt, it also brought a strange sense of peace. Claire was still asleep when he walked downstairs. She had come home late the night before, probably hoping to talk, to beg, to fix what couldn't be fixed. But Ethan had been done listening. He had taken his keys, left the house, and driven for hours, letting the night air whip through his open window as he tried to process everything. Now, as he stood in the kitchen, making coffee like it was just another ordinary day, he realized something. This wasn't his home anymore, not really. The house was filled with memories, but they weren't good ones anymore. They had been poisoned, tainted by Claire's deception. The sound of soft footsteps made him glance up. Claire stood in the doorway wearing one of his old sweatshirts, her hair disheveled from sleep. She looked smaller somehow, like she had shrunk under the weight of what she had done. "Ethan," she started, her voice hesitant, careful. "Can we talk now?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, savoring the warmth before setting the mug down. He met her gaze, and for the first time in their marriage he felt absolutely nothing for her. No love, no longing, just a hollow sense of finality. "There's nothing left to talk about, Claire." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't mean that. We can work through this." Ethan let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "No, we can't. You didn't just make a mistake, Claire. You made a choice. Over and over again, every time you lied to me, every time you snuck off to be with him, you chose this." He gestured between them. "You threw it away." She wiped at her eyes, her breath shaky. "I was stupid. I got caught up in something, but it didn't mean anything. I swear to you, I didn't love him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That makes it worse, Claire. If it didn't mean anything, then you destroyed our marriage for nothing." Silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Finally Claire whispered, "So, that's it? You're just leaving?" He nodded. "I'll be calling a lawyer today. We'll figure out the details, but I'm not going to drag this out." Panic flickered across her face. "Please, Ethan, I don't want to lose you," he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You already did." And with that he walked past her, heading upstairs to pack a bag. By the end of the week, Claire had moved out. She tried to fight it at first, but there was nothing left to hold on to. Ethan refused to entertain her pleas, her half-hearted apologies. She had made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. The cycling group had turned on her almost instantly. The fallout from Ethan's message had spread fast, and the once friendly community that Claire had loved so much now saw her for what she really was. She stopped showing up to group rides. Even Jake, the man she had risked everything for, seemed to be avoiding her. Ethan, on the other hand, found unexpected support. Friends who had once been casual acquaintances checked in on him. People sent messages, offering words of encouragement, reminding him that he deserved better. He had expected to feel lonely after the split, but instead he felt free. One evening, as he sat on his porch with a beer in hand, his phone buzzed with another message. "Good for you, man. You handled this with dignity. You deserve better." It was from someone in the cycling group, someone he barely knew but who had seen everything unfold. Ethan smiled to himself. Maybe this wasn't the end of something. Maybe it was the beginning of something new. The future was wide open, and for the first time in a long time he was ready for it. The ride was over. Now it was time to move forward.